My entitled parents were late to every event in my life, even when I had an accident, but now they're late for their return flight, and it's costing them a fortune. Hello, Reddit. I hope you can help me and give me some advice about my situation. To explain the issue with my parents, I first have to give you some context about how they've been throughout my life. My parents have always been people who only care about themselves, or at least that's how I felt my entire life. It's curious because if something is important to them, they have no problem being on time, but if it's something that doesn't matter much to them, they don't seem to care about being late. They even seem to pick and choose when to be late to avoid staying in certain places longer than necessary. This is something I've always had to endure. My events, my important moments, seemed secondary to them. And this isn't just an isolated complaint. It's something that has repeated itself since I was a kid, from my early school events to much more serious situations in my adult life. I remember back in elementary school, we used to have these little school presentations. They were events that lasted no more than an hour, but for a kid, having your parents there to watch you is one of the most important moments of the year. I would prepare with excitement, knowing that my parents would be there that afternoon, watching me perform or participate, just like all the other parents of my classmates. But my parents? Well, if they showed up, they were late. One of the worst memories I have is from second grade, when we had a school play. I was part of the play. It wasn't a big role, but it was something I had taken very seriously. My classmates were all excited because their families were in the audience, taking pictures and recording videos. I stepped onto the stage, and from the start, I looked for my parents in the crowd. I didn't see them. I continued with the play, performing as I was supposed to, but that feeling of emptiness never went away. I finished my part, and finally, in the last scene, I saw them walk in. They arrived just as the play was ending, when there was nothing left to see. After the event, when I asked them why they were so late, they gave me a ridiculous excuse. Apparently, they had decided to stop for coffee at a new cafe that had been recommended to them on the way. My play lasted less than an hour, but apparently, a cup of coffee was more important. They could have gone any other day, but they chose to do it during my performance, almost as if it was on purpose. What's worse is that this behavior wasn't limited to just my school events. They did the same thing with other people when something didn't seem important enough to them. I remember one time we were going to my grandmother's birthday party, my dad's mother. My grandmother was one of the sweetest people I've ever known, and even though we lived nearby, we didn't visit her as often as we should have. It was her 80th birthday, and the whole family was invited. The plan was simple. We'd pick up the birthday cake and then head straight to her house to celebrate with the family. But of course, my parents always had something more important to do. This time, they decided they needed to go buy some plants for the garden, something they could have done any other time. We arrived at the party more than an hour late. By the time we got there, most people had already eaten, and my grandmother, instead of enjoying her party with everyone, had been worried because we hadn't arrived. It was humiliating for me, but my parents didn't even seem to realize how their lack of consideration affected others. They even made comments like, "Well, at least we made it," and carried on as if nothing had happened. This behavior reached its lowest point years later, at the funeral of that same grandmother. For context, she passed away after a long illness. My father, though not close to his mother, was obviously affected, but once again, that didn't stop them from being late to her funeral. When we arrived, the ceremony had already started. My parents weren't there. Everyone was wondering where they were, and they finally showed up, looking indignant because the ceremony had started without them. The worst part was that they were more than 30 minutes late, yet they acted as if the world had wronged them for not waiting. And this didn't just happen at personal or family events. The same thing would happen when we went to restaurants. They would always make reservations and always show up late. On more than one occasion, we lost our table because they decided they had to do something else first. I remember one particular time when we had reservations at a very popular restaurant in the city. As usual, they arrived almost an hour late. When we got there, we were told that our table had been given to other customers. Instead of accepting responsibility, my parents started yelling at the staff, demanding that they be given a table immediately because they had a reservation. It was embarrassing to be there, and while they complained and caused a scene, all I could think about was how ridiculous the situation was. In the end, the restaurant didn't give us a table, and we had to go somewhere else, but to my parents, it was the restaurant's fault, not theirs for being late. Now, the thing that hurt me the most, and what I've never been able to get over, was the day of my accident. A few years ago, I was in a pretty bad car accident. I broke several ribs and had a fracture in my leg that required surgery. The doctors scheduled me for surgery that afternoon, and my parents were notified of the exact time the surgery would begin. It wasn't a life-or-death surgery, but it was clearly a moment when anyone would want their family close before going into the operating room. I called my parents a few hours before to remind them of the time and make sure they'd arrive on time. But guess what? They were late. When they finally showed up, I was already in recovery. Their excuse? They decided they needed to go to the store because there was a furniture sale. Yes, while I was in the hospital, about to go into surgery, they were out buying furniture. I couldn't believe it. And now, we arrive at the reason why I'm writing this. A few months ago, I decided to be the grateful son and gave my parents a trip as a gift. I had landed a good job, I was earning well, and I thought it would be a nice way to show gratitude for everything they've done for me. Because, despite everything, they have provided me with good things. They paid for my college, and I never lacked anything materially as a child. Well, yes, I did lack their attention, but I mean in a material sense. So this trip was my way of saying thanks. Everything went smoothly on the way there. We got to the airport on time, and everything was pretty easy. During our stay in the country we visited, they behaved as they usually do, at their own pace, without worrying too much about the scheduled times for the tourist activities. But hey, we were on vacation, so I let it go. Also, since we did separate activities, I didn't mind them being late. It didn't affect me. When we would meet up for lunch or breakfast, if they didn't show up on time, I'd just go ahead and start because I couldn't just sit at a table without ordering for an hour. It wasn't a trip where we had to do everything together. They wanted to do some things, and I wanted to do others, and we were all fine with that. The problem arose on the return flight. I warned them well in advance about the departure time and also told them how early we needed to be at the airport. Knowing their habits, I took a taxi to the airport on my own and arrived with plenty of time to spare. I had done the same on the way there, although that time was because their house wasn't on the way to the airport. But at least that time, they managed to be on time. However, they decided to linger over breakfast and then pack at a leisurely pace. They finally arrived at the airport with only 20 minutes before the flight was set to take off. By the time they reached the boarding gate, the plane had already closed its doors and was ready to depart. They caused a scene. Although I wasn't there to witness it, they told me their version, which I assume is much more toned down than what really happened. According to them, they demanded that the airport staff let them board since they had tickets, and it was their right to be on that plane. But in reality, the flight was ready to depart, and there was nothing the staff could do. They ended up having to pay for 2 last-minute tickets, which, of course, cost almost 3 times what the original ones did. The worst part is that now my parents are demanding that I pay for those tickets. Because, according to them, it's my fault for not buying flexible tickets. My response was that even if I had bought flexible tickets, it wouldn't have allowed them to show up late without consequences. If they wanted to change the flight, they should have done so in advance, not after the plane had already taken off or was about to. In their view of the world, they believe the plane should have waited for them, or at least that the airline should have offered them another flight at no cost. Since that didn't happen, they think I should cover the extra cost because, in their minds, the trip was my gift, and I should take care of all the expenses, even those caused by their irresponsibility. As for me, I have no intention of paying for those extra tickets. I gifted them the trip, gave them plenty of notice about the flight time, and they chose not to take it seriously. This trip was my way of thanking them for everything, like paying for my college, but I feel like I've done enough. I'd like to know what you all think. Should I pay for those extra tickets? Update 1. First of all, I want to thank everyone who took the time to read my previous story and share their thoughts. It has been a huge relief to see that most people agree that I'm not the bad guy in this situation, which honestly lifts a big weight off my shoulders. Many of you mentioned that since it was a gift, I fulfilled my part. I paid for the flights, accommodation, and everything related to the main experience. The responsibility to be on time at the airport, as several of you pointed out, was on my parents, and any additional expense caused by their lack of planning is something they should take care of. With this in mind, I finally decided to sit down and talk to my parents about the issue. It wasn't an easy conversation because, as many of you probably guessed, my parents didn't take what I had to say very well. Essentially, I explained the same thing I've told you. I gifted them a trip, and that gift included the flights to and from the destination, as well as the hotel stay. If they chose to linger over breakfast and didn't make it to the airport on time, that's their issue. As adults, they should have understood that missing the flight meant an additional expense, which, obviously, wasn't part of the gift. Well, as expected, they didn't take it well. My mom, in particular, was the most vocal, saying that a gift should be complete. According to her, since I was the one who gave them the trip, that meant I should also take responsibility for any unforeseen expenses related to the trip. My dad, while less expressive, agreed with her. In their view, if I committed to paying for the trip, then I should have covered everything, including the tickets they missed by not arriving on time. When I told them that was ridiculous, I used an example to illustrate how illogical their point was. If you had decided to spend thousands of dollars at the casino, luckily you didn't, or if you had wanted to rent a yacht while we were there, should I have paid for that too? My mom paused, but then said something that, for me, was even more baffling. Those are optional additional expenses, but the flight is part of the main trip. In her mind, missing the flight and having to pay for new tickets was something I should have anticipated when gifting them the trip. This is where I realized how differently we see things. To me, the gift was clear, and there was no room for misunderstanding. I bought the tickets for the scheduled flight, and the itinerary was planned well in advance. It wasn't my fault they chose not to take it seriously and arrive late at the airport. I explained this again as calmly as possible, but every time I tried to reason with them, they seemed more upset. I understand that my parents view the world in a very particular way, but the fact that they won't recognize their responsibility in all of this and are trying to make me feel like the bad guy for not paying for their extra tickets was a low blow. My dad, in his less confrontational style, suggested that maybe I could pay for half the cost of the tickets as a middle ground. But honestly, that didn't seem fair to me. Agreeing to pay half would imply that, in some way, I share part of the blame in all of this, and I don't think that's the case. It's not like I lied about the flight time to make them miss it, quite the opposite. I'm not willing to give in on this point. I've already been generous enough by giving them this trip, and I'm not going to take on more responsibilities, let alone let them manipulate me. The conversation ended on a tense note. There were no shouting matches, but they were clearly quite upset. I know my parents tend to be proud, so they probably won't leave it at this. I'm sure they'll bring it up again later, perhaps in a more passive-aggressive way or by trying to find some other means of getting what they want. But I'm standing firm in my decision. Update 2. It's been 5 months since my last post, and well, here I am again because I have something new to share about my parents. First of all, I want to mention that my birthday was 2 days ago. So if you want to leave a birthday wish, or who knows, send me a gift, just kidding, feel free to do so in the comments. Honestly, I wasn't planning on giving another update, but after what happened on my birthday, I felt like I couldn't pass up the chance to share it with all of you. Even though my parents kept making comments about the plane tickets for a while, it wasn't as constant or insistent as before. Every now and then, they'd casually bring it up with passive-aggressive comments like, if we had more flexibility with those tickets, we'd have money for. Or, it's a shame not all gifts cover unforeseen expenses. But it never escalated into a formal request for me to pay for the tickets. They just mention it, and over time, it seemed to lose steam. Or at least, that's what I thought. However, after what they did on my birthday, I can't help but think that my parents haven't entirely let this go. Or, at the very least, they still believe they were right in that situation and are determined to prove it in absurd ways. Let me get to the point. As I said, it was my birthday 2 days ago, and I decided to host a small gathering at my house. Nothing too structured or formal, just a laid-back evening with some friends and close family, snacks, pizza, and some music. I knew, as usual, my parents would arrive late, so I didn't bother setting a strict schedule. There wasn't any special activity requiring punctuality. It was more of a come whenever you want kind of thing, which kept me relaxed. Sure enough, they arrived late, as expected. This time, their excuse was something ridiculous, like traffic being terrible, even though they live only 20 minutes from my house, and the rest of the guests had no issues getting there. But whatever, I didn't care at all since the party didn't have a set start or end time, and everyone was having a good time. What really stunned me was their gift, if you can even call it that. After they arrived, they got something to eat and then approached me with a rather peculiar smile. My dad was holding a gift bag, and while I was a bit surprised that they brought me something, I wasn't expecting much. I hadn't asked for anything, and honestly, after everything with the trip, my expectations were low. I opened the bag, and to my surprise, inside was a single shoe. Not a pair, just one shoe from what seemed to be a reasonably decent brand. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe they had left the other shoe at home or something. But when I looked at them, my mom was laughing, and my dad had that smug expression he gets when he thinks he's done something clever. I asked, "What is this?" "Just one shoe." And then came the response, which honestly left me torn between laughter and annoyance. They told me, with complete seriousness, that they could only afford one shoe, and if I wanted the other one, I'd have to go buy it myself. I had to stop myself from bursting out laughing right there. Did they really think I'd believe that any store would sell them just one shoe? Because most likely, they bought the whole pair and, for some reason, decided to gift me only one, as if this were some kind of message or lesson they wanted me to learn. Maybe they were trying to show me their twisted version of things, like saying, "See, this is how it feels when you don't get a complete gift." which, to me, is utterly ridiculous. I couldn't help but imagine the situation. Maybe they threw the other shoe in the trash, or perhaps they have it hidden somewhere in their house as part of some weird joke. Maybe next year, they'll give me the missing shoe. But the fact that they went to this effort just to make a point seemed incredibly absurd. If they really wanted to prove something, they could have been more straightforward. I don't know what they did with the other shoe, but what's clear is that they put a lot of effort into this little act of revenge or lesson. Whatever they meant by this, I'm certain they still hold some resentment over the plane tickets, and this was their way of channeling it. Perhaps they just wanted to do something that would let them have the last word on the matter. Whatever the case, it doesn't bother me much. As I said, I wasn't expecting any gift, and I would have preferred nothing over something so petty and ridiculous. However, it didn't change the fact that, in the end, I laughed. Because what else can you do in a situation like this? After opening my half of the gift, I just smiled, thanked them, and went back to the party like nothing had happened. I didn't want to ruin the vibe or make a big deal out of something so trivial. Besides, there was no point in arguing with them about something that was clearly meant as provocation. If their goal was to upset me or make me feel bad, they failed. I decided it wasn't worth putting more energy into the situation, so I continued enjoying my party with my friends and the other guests. So, this is the update I wanted to share with you all. After 5 months of relative peace, my parents found a way to do something bizarre and unnecessary just to keep up their peculiar way of being. I don't know if this means they'll bring up the plane tickets again, or if they'll finally let the issue go once and for all. All I know is that I'm not going to give this more importance than it deserves. In the end, what they did only confirmed what I already knew. They haven't changed, and I doubt they ever will. I'll definitely keep you updated if there are more surprises in the future, but for now, I'll just enjoy the other shoe I bought myself. Just kidding. See you in the comments. Update 3. I'm back. I've taken the time to read everything you all have said, and honestly, it's given me a lot to think about. To sum up what most of you have mentioned, it seems that while my parents' behavior isn't openly aggressive or extreme, it is concerning. The way they've held a grudge for months over something that was objectively their fault and not mine is what many of you pointed out as a red flag. And it's not the only one in my life. I've been reflecting on this, and the truth is I can't ignore what you all have said. Besides reading your comments, I also talked to some close friends about everything that's happened, including the strange gift they gave me on my birthday. Interestingly, my friends agreed that this isn't just an innocent joke, but a sign that my parents are dealing with unresolved resentment. One of my friends said something that really stuck with me. How long are they going to keep doing this kind of thing? Today it's a shoe, but tomorrow it could be something bigger. That comment made me think a lot. This isn't just about one joke. It's a pattern that, while it's never escalated to extreme levels, has been constant. And more importantly, it seems this is their way of dealing with situations when things don't go their way. They hold on to resentment, process it passive-aggressively, and eventually do something to make their point. And honestly, this isn't a dynamic I want to keep tolerating in my life. I've come to the conclusion that I need to take a little distance. I'm not saying I'm going to cut off contact completely or dramatically. I don't think it's necessary to go that far at this point. It's not like they've been harassing or pressuring me constantly, but I do think it's time to create some space between us. At the end of the day, they're my parents, and they always will be. But I believe that distancing myself a bit and setting clearer boundaries will help prevent these situations from continuing to affect me. Update 4. I'm back after 4 months and wanted to give an update on what's been happening, mainly to respond to those who've been asking whether my parents have tried to reach out or if there have been any changes since my last post. The truth is, my parents have completely disappeared from my life in these past months. After I decided to take some distance and stopped contacting them, I initially expected that at some point they would reach out, maybe to talk or try to fix things. But none of that has happened. They haven't called, sent any messages, or made the slightest attempt to get in touch with me. At first, I thought maybe they were upset with me, which would make sense given how proud they are and how poorly they usually handle situations like this. I imagine they might feel like they're the ones who've been wronged, and that I'm the one to blame for not paying for those tickets. But I've also been wondering if they're just so wrapped up in their own world that they haven't even noticed my absence in a meaningful way. Sometimes, it feels like their own interests and routines take up so much space that it's easy for them to forget what's going on around them, even when it involves their own son. In any case, their silence has actually made things easier for me. It's become clear that they aren't necessary in my life right now, and their lack of effort only proves that point further. Edit. Someone made a joke about how my parents might have been late to the distribution of brains, and while I found it funny, I don't actually think my parents are dumb. They're very smart, or at least they believe they are. That's why they think they're better than others, and that their time is more valuable than the time of the people who have to wait for them. It's their sense of superiority that leads to these problems.